Good day from my side. My name is Neuhaus from Bielefeld University, and my talk is going to cover the National Basketball Association's illustration of Blackness from the year 1984 to 2005 as snapshots into different facets of the United States. The aim of this talk is to reconstruct dominant ideas about race, with special emphasis on Blackness, and linking these to the strategic presentations perpetuated and manifested by the National Basketball Association. Let me start with some anecdotal knowledge to get across the key points of this slide. When back then Commissioner David Stern was asked which teams he would like to see compete in the finals, he answered that his dream pairing for the finals would be the Los Angeles Lakers against the Los Angeles Lakers. While most saw this statement as a little joke, it hints at the multifaceted nature of the National Basketball Association. In order to understand David Stern's statement, one must know that Los Angeles is drawing on a national TV scale, as well as merchandise sales, as well as on ticket sales, the biggest crowds in the entire league. So economically speaking, the Los Angeles Lakers are the most profitable team at the moment and also of the past 20 years. This, however, is in direct opposition to the logic of the sport itself, which is meritocratic or mostly meritocratic rule governed, which means that all players have to follow the same rules refereed by the referees, and the outcome of the games is or should be solely based on effort, skill, and a bit of God-given luck or the absence of this. What Stern hinted at, though, with his wish for the finals pairing, was the media and the business side of the National Basketball Association. So in his view, meeting Los Angeles in the finals would increase the attractiveness of the product, would have some kind of narrative climax, which would spark interest in the audiences. It would be a marketable teams would be in the finals, which of course would result in higher sales of merchandise, the increase of the revenue generated from the TV rights, etc., etc., etc. While this may sound like a fun anecdotal joke uttered by the commissioner of the league back then, such statements should be treated, or not the statements itself, but the underlying structure they hint at should be treated with a bit more caution. When taking into account that the NBA was faced with a refereeing scandal around the rogue referee Tim Donahue, who argued and who stated publicly that the NBA rigged the games in favor of bigger market teams such as Los Angeles, this of course sparked not just only public interest, but also caused irritation. This irritation can be explained by the different systems the NBA operates in, so the media and business system colliding with the logic of the system it is also part of, the sports system. One is rather meritocratic, the sports, whereas media and business primarily focus on generating revenue in this case. So as argued, sport is linked to media, which is presented in TV and other forms, and through that it is connected to the world of economics and business, so the merchandise, the TV rights, and the targeting of certain audiences. And through the business side, for example, through sporting goods, as said, merchandise, and of course the corresponding brands, it is also connected to the aspect of culture. So when we, for example, think about famous fashion items such as Michael Jordan shoes, or in short just Jordans, those have a pretty huge appeal on young people and became a fashion statement and remained one ever. This, however, is not the only connection to culture, but also the sport recruits people which can play the sport based on meritocratic rules, Those people, however, stem from a certain culture, right? They grew up in a certain setting, and of course bring in, let's say, fashion items, attitudes, ideas, etc. into the sport, which is then again linked back to the media and the business aspect of that. So we see a wild and messy interplay between those four dimensions in which the NBA is operating. In this talk, however, we focus on one particular occurrence and one particular problem the NBA is facing, and as said, the NBA is located in those four realms. The problem we're facing in this talk is that the based on meritocratic principles recruited players are primarily black, whereas the target audience, the high-paying target audience, is primarily white. This poses the problem that there's assumed to be missing connection between the athletes and, through media representation, the product and the target audience. And in this talk I'm going to present an analysis of what I suspect to be the NBA's strategy to overcome that gap. As argued earlier, the league, the NBA, as well as teams are marketed around individuals. So we have personalities as focalizers. Those are sometimes referred to as franchise players or star players, the best players on each team. And these, like the very best of these, are often considered the face of the league. As said, we're not talking about reality here. Each player probably bears aspects of his or her, of his personality which are great and others which are not that great. It was, for example, said that Michael Jordan had a problem with gambling. However, here we're only going to focus on the representation perpetuated by the NBA. So by or through analyzing the franchise players, we try to gain insights on these different facets of the United States: media, sports, business, and culture. And as one can also argue, basketball is one of the three big American sports besides football and baseball. So it's a massive part of American culture, which is also brought abroad to other places in the world. In fact, there's an active expansion of the sports leagues, not just basketball, but also football. And through those combined efforts, sports plays a tremendous role, not just in the media in the USA, but also how America is perceived, or the United States is perceived outside of the USA. One quick note on the temporal references used here. So I choose to start the analysis in 1984 because this was the year in which David Stern took over as commissioner. David Stern was the most successful commissioner in NBA history, generating in his first 10 years a revenue plus of 1,600%. And the analysis ends in the year 2005. An occurrence called the Malice in the Palace, a brawl between the Detroit Pistons and Indiana Pacers, which resulted in a reputational loss by the NBA, which again resulted in 20% less audience for the finals series. And that again, of course, caused a tremendous ditch in the revenues. Therefore, the league responded with some pretty strict measures on how to regulate athletes, and thereby changed its finding schemes, installed dress codes, etc., to re-establish a trustworthy brand image, so to speak, which of course correlates or interplays with the illustration of race, but also of culture and of certain traits the NBA wants to represent. If we look at the here presented three time spans and the perpetuated themes, we can see that the NBA decided or looked at the players who were available and successful based on meritocratic standards and attached certain labels, certain storylines, one could speak, to them. This starts, as argued, in 1984, or this analysis starts in 1984, and the dualistic strategy. And this is important because there's always two strategies perpetuated by the NBA at each time, focuses on on Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers versus Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. So, and the duopoly, or the dichotomy we can observe here, is the razzle-tazzle Showtime Lakers, physically strong athletes gifted by nature, versus the team play-oriented Boston Celtics. While the Lakers were primarily black and flashy in their play, or this is at least what is presented, how it's presented, Boston was a primarily white team and played team-oriented basketball. As said, it cannot be said to what extent this is reality or was reality, but this is how the league marketed the two teams. In the background of this, in 1984, also Michael Jordan was drafted and continually built to become the franchise, or the face of the franchise and the league. This Jordan took over in 1992 at the Olympics in Barcelona, and alongside Scottie Pippen and the Chicago Bulls, he won in the following 6 titles and became the icon he now is. Here we see a transfer from primarily considered white values, hard-working corporate professionalism, onto a black athlete as Jordan. Simultaneously, we have still the dichotomy of exotic blackness, so physically strong players doing flashy plays, versus the prolific, hard-working Michael Jordan. So here we can see the first little hint at the strategy the NBA perpetuated. So the transfer of traits prior associated with white players were put onto black players. This can be considered a sanitization of the product of the NBA, making it safe to consume for whites. And through that image transfer onto black players, the NBA tried to bridge the difference between the players and the targeted audiences. In the years 2001 to 2005, it can be observed that further image transfer happened. So the corporate man image, originally illustrated by Jordan, was tried to transfer onto Kobe Bryant, whereas we have a change in the exotic blackness aspect, which is now turned into an urban theme. I named here ghetto aesthetics, primarily represented by the icon Allen Iverson. Somehow, instead of prior exotic blackness expression of just physically strong players doing flashy plays all the time, Iverson's image was urban, was black for sure. However, it was also combined with a meritocratic twist to it, which underlined his hard-working attitude. Same can be said about Ben Wallace and the Detroit Pistons, who reran a version of the Bad Boys team of Detroit. Generally speaking, we see a continuation of successful strategies, such as the hard-working image the NBA tries to attach to almost all its players, a continuation of these strategies, and a gradual expansion of these strategies onto all players. One can argue that this is a corporate colonization of blackness, as the genuine expression of the players themselves is overwritten with images the league thinks they benefit the most from and which are most sellable to their preferred audiences. As I could hopefully outline, the NBA's interest is to bridge the gap between its players and the product they constitute and the audiences they want to or they target. This poses a couple of questions for the future. For example, how does corporate America, for example the NBA, reacts to Black Lives Matter movements, etc., which is also supported by its players? Other questions which could be asked is which aspects are made invisible, for example certain scandals with reference to refereeing or performance enhancing drugs, negative traits of players which undermine the meritocratic structure of the league, such as rigged drafts, etc. So how does the league behave with regard to scandals? Then also, for further research, it could be looked at which rules, which aspects are rather bendable and which are stable. So to what extent is it tolerable that certain rules are broken, for example, for the bigger aim of having a nice, profitable final series. But also other aspects such as how our bodies and expressions are regulated with when they are not compatible with the logic of commerce. That, of course, extends easily into the digital space. And, of course, how does globalization, so more diverse markets and global markets, change the NBA's product? As said, this is only an overview for future questions I would like to work on. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. And I'm really looking forward to some feedback and some fruitful discussion with you.